Warren. I have a school in North Georgia mountains called Medicine. And there I teach, I'm known for teaching what's called the survival skills of the Native Americans. It's been an interest of mine for a long time. I've been teaching it now for more than half a century. And I have a nice piece of land, 35 acres, that juts into the national forest, so it's got a nice remote feeling to it. In my classes, we learn things such as how to create fire with our hands, how to stalk wild animals, how to purify water without pots and pans, how to track, how to read the manuscript of the earth to see what exactly happened here and to recognize the animal that made the tracks. Archery. The other night I taught a class on Plains Indian Sign Language. You can't get much more esoteric than that. It's a lot of fun. But let me tell you my little secret mission. All of these things have always inspired me, these skills. I've always wanted to know them as a little boy. So over the many years I've accrued these skills by working solo, making lots and lots of mistakes, which makes me a better teacher today. Because I can look at a student now who is attempting to perhaps create fire, and I can see exactly what is keeping him from success, because I remember when I did that very thing. But my secret mission is this. I got into all of this as a career because I saw this huge gap between most of the people that I know and the real world. The real world is all of nature. It is the world that the first people found themselves on in order to learn how to do everything that was necessary for survival. This real world we still depend on. I'm going to give you an example that you already know about, but I hope that you might think a little differently about it after I mention it to you right now. You all remember from high school science a page in the book that showed the cross-section of a leaf and how the gases came in through the stomachs and how photosynthesis works, all of that. But it really never was brought to bear to us that is the equation of life on this planet, photosynthesis. And here's why. Did you know that every single movement you make, including your heart beating, the blinking of your eyelids, climbing a tree, running 100 meters as fast as you can go, all of that requires energy. All of the energy that you use comes from the sun. That is a fact, a scientific fact. It comes to us in packages called photons. You and I cannot receive the photons. We receive a little bit of heat from it. Most of the heat that we experience is radiated back from the earth. That's what helps to create our atmosphere. But we cannot understand the absorption of energy and then be able to use that energy because we're not equipped that way. It is the green plants that do that. Now here's a phrase I'm a little bit reluctant to use: for us. Because it's not just for us. It's for every living thing that needs oxygen. Oxygen is a byproduct of that equation of photosynthesis. The Native Americans, though they could not write out a formula for photosynthesis as we can now, they knew instinctively that plants were the source of all of our energy. They understood that plants actually communicated with one another. And they have been trying to tell us that for centuries. but we didn't listen, and now we know it. We know it for a scientific fact. How trees not only communicate with one another, but also share materials underground with one another. We still depend on nature, isn't that true? But we don't see that in our lives, do we? We can't see the absorption of energy by a leaf, and we don't see the transfer necessarily. You may think that you don't eat a leaf from time to time, but you do, and you eat fruits. You eat lots of greens, but if you eat meat, you're eating an animal that ate something green, right? Or perhaps you're eating an animal that ate another animal that ate something green. That's the transfer of energy, and we are all part of that equation. And without photosynthesis, we cannot be here on this planet. So we do depend on it, but we depend on it in more ways than just that one that I explained to you just now. There are many ways that we benefit from nature, but what I'm seeing now is our new generations coming along with greater distance from nature. And we have some real competition with that, with all of the flashy screens that exist. And I can see how very alluring they are. I don't blame a child for wanting to look at a cell phone or play a computer game, because they're fascinating. But why did they see that in nature? Well, it's because no one showed them. And that is the value of the nature teacher here. And we're going to talk today and look at lots of plants that are edible by humans. And I think this is a profound way to get someone interested in nature again. And here's why. I believe that eating is the ultimate act of love. How many times have you ever seen, especially a woman, hold a young child and say to that child, I could eat you up? Right? That's love. How many times have you sat down to a meal and looked at one certain thing that you really like and thought to yourself, oh boy, I mean, there's love in that. And if you show a child something that child can eat and let them experience that in the wild, that's a life changer. Because the next time they see that plant somewhere else, they have a friend right there in that new territory. If a child, for example, tastes a ripe persimmon in late October, the next time that child experiences a persimmon tree in another place, it's like running into an old friend. This is getting our children back to nature. Now, keep in mind as we look over these pictures today and have some fun learning about what plants can be eaten. This is not a definitive class that gives you free license to go out and start foraging in the forest. You really do need to spend your own time and earn your way to it by studying plants, because this is the one area that has a lot of potential danger to it. You know, if someone comes to my class and attempts to create a basket, say, and the basket turns out looking horrible, okay, that's fine. There's one little failure. Let's try it again. But you can't experiment with foods and medicines. And the third area that I believe it should never be experimented in is hunting. I feel like a hunter owes it to all the animals of the world to become really proficient with the weapon that's going to be used, so that animal does not suffer in its hunting. Those are the three areas I really believe in that require a certain gaining merit to get there. So please don't go out from today and then look at a plant and say, I think that's the one Mark talked about. I think I'll try it. Just never allow yourself to do that. I have never allowed myself to do it. I will never take a guess with a wild food, and I hope you won't too. Just a while ago, I heard outside the door someone was asking, what's going on in here? And I heard a young lady said, it's about eating plants. And then she followed it up with, the edible ones. So please, let's all agree on that one stipulation, that you really do owe it to yourself and to anyone that might see you eat, which makes you a teacher. You owe it to all of those people and to yourself to be really knowledgeable about this. Now here's the sad news for you guys and ladies. A class like this would never have to have been taught in ancient times, because did you know that all human beings in paleo times were born into this world with the knowledge already hardwired into their genetics about what could be eaten and what not, about what a plant could give them in the way of medicine, and so on, and which plants were poisonous. That sounds like a far-fetched piece of fiction, doesn't it? But any anthropologist will tell you that today. We have lost those instincts. And guess what was the main culprit in losing our instincts? The development of what I'm doing right now, talking. Language. I happen to love language. I'm an author, so I love language. I love words. But this was one of the primary reasons that people as a whole have lost instincts. It's worldwide almost. There are probably a few isolated areas where people still have those instincts. I've never met anyone who did that. There may be someone like that in Borneo, or maybe in the Amazon area. But let's all remember that we have lost those instincts. And we have to then become academically smart about it. So here we go. Let's be academic for a while. This is a vine air potato that is of the genus Diasporea, which is related to yams. It grows in very sunny areas. It needs support. So here you see some that's growing on a fence. And look at the shape of that leaf. It's an interesting and very specific shape. The tubers that you see growing there, you'll find them growing in pairs. And they look just like miniature potatoes. And they can be eaten raw, or they can be eaten or prepared any way you would prepare a potato. You could have hashed brown air potatoes, mashed air potatoes, French fried air potatoes. You'll find these are ripe at the end of summer, and they tend to dry out very well, so that when you pluck one of those off, 12 drop on the ground. So be ready for that. You might want to put something underneath to catch some. They taste very much like the Irish potato, the white potato that we're all familiar with. I'm going to mention one sort of lookalike that I want you to look up sometime. You know, when somebody says that these days, it's easy to do that, right? You Google it. I want you to Google morning glory. Don't pay any attention to the flower, because you're not seeing the flower here. Look at the leaf. Look at the seeds that are attached to the vine. Get to where you can recognize the differences between these two. How many people here have ever tasted an air potato? So that's a new one to almost everybody. Cattail is the famous edible that's known so worldwide because there's something to be eaten year-round. With the air potato that we just looked at, you've got this fairly small window when you can eat them. In the summer, through the very first part of fall, and then that's it. But you know what you can do in the winter with that air potato? I should have mentioned this. You can dig down and get the underground swelling, the root. And you can cook that as a giant potato. So the plant makes up for those tiny little air tubers, and you've got quite a large tuber underground that you can eat. Cattail has something for us year-round. The one that you can we could use right now, at this time of the year, when it's so hard to find most of the wild edible plants simply because they've died back and the greenery is no longer there in most cases. When we find the underground parts of plants, we know how to find them, and that means you know how to identify the dead leaves of the cattail as compared to other long, thin leaves that might grow in a marshy area or a swampy area. You probably know that there are different ways that plants reproduce. The famous one is, which hasn't always been this way, it happened along the steps of natural history of the world. There was a time when there were no flowers at all. And we believe that the first flower that ever developed was on a magnolia tree. We have lots of different kinds of magnolia trees. But before that, spores were what were sent through the air, like with fern trees. When flowers came along, it just changed the world because now every plant had its own UPS system to come pick up and deliver. We call those insects. They were attracted to the flower because of the color and because of the smell of the nectar. That's food. When they get in there and they're walking around the flower, they're messy eaters. They come away from it, pollen all over them. Go to the next flower, and that's the delivery for the sexual reproduction of the plant. There's also an asexual reproduction, and it happens underground. And that's where an underground stem, not a root, but a stem. A stem is the main trunk of any plant. The trunk of a tree is its stem. The stems grow underground horizontally and pop up clones. And so this is the asexual method. And those underground stems are called rhizomes. And you can see rhizomes in this picture. That's some rhizomes I'm holding in my hand right there. Now they have a brownish sheath-like cover that you can see, kind of a coppery brown. Do you see one of those that terminates in a tapering point that's kind of white? That's called a horn. And what you're looking at is the brand new shoot from next year's plant. That's where the new plant will come from. That horn can be snapped off and eaten, clean it off, eat it raw. But inside of the rhizome itself, you can make a slit down there and open it up, and what you'll find is lots of white starch and lots of fibers that feel like something synthetic. And these were actually fibers that were prominent in the development of rayon. So this is an inedible fiber, and it's why livestock is kept away from cattails. Because if they were to eat these tubers and get these fibers, they're going to possibly get colic. Just get stopped up by these fibers. They're not digestible. But that white powder carbohydrate around it is edible. So what you can do is this. You could cut one open, pull out the entire interior mass, or just take it out with your mouth. That's what I do. And chew and swallow all of the liquid that you can get out of that, and then take the wad of fibers out of your mouth. Maybe you want to save those and make some cordage with that later. In the springtime, when one of those horns sends up a brand new stem that comes out of the mud and the water, in the first few weeks of that growth, that is one of the most delicious parts of the cattail. If you were to break off that whole new growth, you might have something about this tall. Break it off from the rhizome, and then start peeling away all the leaves one at a time. And you get down to this beautiful white core. And that's edible raw right away. And it is delicious. Wonderful in a salad, for example. Okay, so let's move on from spring into summer. You can see on the right side of the photo a tour plant showing you flowering parts. You know how that piece appears? It looks a little bit reminiscent of a hot dog on a stick. Well, don't ever think of it as a hot dog. If this thing has gone to seed and you start eating into that, you'd have a mouthful of fluff that you would never believe. In fact, when you take one off, has anyone ever taken one of those heads off and just twisted it? It is amazing how much of the fluff is called pappus, the fluffy material of seeds. The most familiar pappus you would probably know is from dandelion seeds. You know, when you blow that, that's all pappus that's holding up the seed like a parachute. Well, the pappus of that is not useful to us as a food. But did you know that in World War II this was used in life preservers? You ever heard of K-pop? That's the filler for life preservers, and that's what that was used for. But before it goes to seed like that, you have a treat. You may never have noticed this, but right above that hot dog-like figure, which is the female part of the flower, is the male flower, right above it. And both of them are encased in a sheath, a little bit like the husk of corn. And before they mature, if you go into those, taking the sheath off of that, you can eat them raw, or you could cook them. The female flower can be also eaten the same way. Now, if you like another treat, what is that male part above? What is it going to make? It's going to make pollen. And that pollen is edible for us. You could take a bag or a container of some kind and just lean over that flower and shake it inside the bag, and you'll get a good bit of yellow pollen fall out of it. You can eat that raw, or you could use that as a primitive flour, F-L-O-U-R. You could make bread with that. You cannot expect fluffy biscuits. What you need to expect is what was called flatbread. It's going to be a primitive kind of bread, but there it is. It's a bread, and it can be enjoyed. You know, I'll tell you something, just kind of as a break in this right now for a moment, about eating wild foods in general. When you get serious about it and you really get into learning as much as you can about these, and especially if you ever have the urge to have an adventure. To me, this is the greatest adventure that I've ever gone on in my life. Every season, for many years, I would go on what I would call a survival trip. It's a self-imposed survival trip. It doesn't involve a plane crash or me being lost, but I go out into a wilderness area and live off the land for a time. There could be no better way for me to train myself as a teacher for all this than to do it that way. When I'm looking for food, I have completely lost that all-American characteristic of needing certain taste. You have to admit, we eat for taste. I'll bet there's no one in this room who cannot say that they've not done this. I know I have. You're sitting at a table, maybe with some friends, you've had a fantastic meal. At the end, they serve this delicious piece of pie. It was so good. You are full. And you say, when they ask you, would you like some more? When the obvious answer should be no, you say, maybe a little slice. So why do you do that? What is the benefit of that? You want to taste it again, right? Guilty. Hands, please. We all do that. You lose that, and in its place comes an appreciation for nutrition. That is a real craving that you learn to have certain nutrition, to get the proteins that you need. And if you know plants well, you can get your proteins from the plants. Does it involve hunting at all? I'm not an anti-hunter, but if you can get your proteins from plants, why not? Okay, anybody have a question about cattails? Because that's kind of involved, all those different seasons that you can use it. Okay. Has anyone in the room ever read, or at least looked at a little bit in the journals of Lewis and Clark? I'd be interested in raising your hand. You know, I consider that to be one of the most important moments in American history. It's often compared to when we sent people to the moon, because the folks who went with Lewis and Clark really did not know what to expect, except in a few exceptions. You know, there were people who had mountain men with them who had already been out there, but it was a real venture into the unknown, and it was quite a survival trip. And I don't believe that Lewis and Clark's party could possibly have been successful without the Native Americans' help. And that goes beyond Sacagawea, because you know, they were starving at times, and Native people showed them what they could eat, fed them first, and then taught them how they could prepare them themselves. This plant, wapato, you will find in that book many times. The tribes along the Missouri River actually farmed this plant. Now, if you wanted to look this plant up in a book, you would find this under the term duck potato. Duck potato. Wapato is the native word, and it's interesting to me how similar that word is to potato, because that's exactly what it makes. Under the mud, it makes a really eye-catching swelling that is about as large as, well, you're lucky if you'll find one as big as a ping pong ball. Usually they're going to be something about the size of a large marble. And it's covered in interesting colors. There's a strong resemblance of looking into a bloodshot eye when you look at those. They are a little challenging to find because they're growing on the rhizomes. So this is another plant that reproduces by sending rhizomes under the mud. And you have to get into the mud and feel your way out the rhizomes until you find the swelling. And you'll come to many dead ends where there's no swelling at all. And by the time you have looked at a place enough, you are a solid mess. And I found out that the way that the native women did it was to take off their moccasins and just go through the mud, and they would kind of floss their toes with the rhizomes. And if they found a swelling at the end, popped it off, and it floats, it rises to the top. So I found that a good way to find one when you think that you might have failed is to stand back and wait for a while, and now you've made the water muddy because of your actions there, but you may very well see one tube of bob up. And then you've got something you can cook. And again, it's another potato-like food, wapato. Let me point out something about it that you need to remember if you'd like to try this food. I want you to look at the veination, the vein pattern. If you look at this leaf as if it's 3 lobes, 1, 2, 3, you'll see that there is a pattern of veins that run somewhat parallel, that all lead right here at this convergent point and then come together at the end of the leaf, like so. That should look familiar to you. This was the original vein pattern on planet Earth. There was a time when there were no veins at all in any plants. We still have some of those ancient plants around. You're all familiar with moss. Moss does not have internal conduits to carry fluid. Moss is designed to hold water like a sponge, and then the water absorbs into it. When veins came along, that was another thing that just changed the world in natural history. Look how each of those 3 lobes has a set of parallel veins running out in each lobe. Now, you're all familiar with the kind of vein system that looks this way. Look up here at me a moment. Imagine this as the middle vein in a leaf, and you've got lateral veins coming off the side. Looks kind of like the skeleton of a tree. You've seen that many times. Picture this plant with those veins. It looks exactly the same in every way except for the vein pattern. And this plant is called Sagittaria, or arum, and it's full of a chemical that will literally burn your mouth. I know of a nature center teacher who had just started work and was very enthusiastic about wild edibles, and she took her class out into a marsh, and they gathered these swellings down in the mud underneath, not wapato, but arum. And they all went back and prepared it. Everybody ate some. Everybody's mouth was burned. So one little facet like that can mean the difference in success and making what could be a dire mistake. You're blessed with many fruits in Katua, Southern Appalachia. The one on the top left is one of my very favorite trees. And one of the reasons for that is not only does it make one of the sweetest fruits I've ever eaten, most satisfying fruits, but it also, those leaves that you're looking at on the upper left of the pawpaw tree, they work as a beautiful insect repellent on your body. If you know that you are not allergic to it, in other words, if you give yourself a test on the inside of your wrist, that's a place where you have no calluses, unless you are a really serious tree hugger. Test yourself by rubbing the leaf into there, give it 20 minutes. If you have no reaction of definite rash there, then you're good to go with pawpaw. You can rub your body with it, and don't throw the used leaf away. Stick it in a pocket, stick it in your belt, stick it in your socks. You're going to be tick-free and, most importantly, sugar-free. How many people out there think you have your picture in the Chigger catalog, the Chigger manual? I'm one of those. Something about our body chemistry, is very tasty to a Chigger. So the pawpaw tree is really important to me. If you had to sleep overnight in the summertime in the South, out in the woods, for some reason, and you didn't have any kind of protection, you could have 200 chigger bites the next morning. That would be enough to break your morale. I'm serious. It's a big deal. There was one time I allowed a person to come along with me on a survival trip because he just begged me and begged me. I always wanted to do it solo because I enjoy doing it solo. And I think that when you do things by yourself, you experience the truest honesty that you own. Because you don't do things reacting to other people. But he went with me. We were on a coastal island off the coast of Georgia. And he made a bed of Spanish moss. And I kept begging him, don't sleep on that. Don't do it. He said, oh, it's okay. I've got my poncho. I'll put that on top. He slept on it. And the next morning, he was a different human being. And he would not laugh at this. He left me. He went home. It was so bad. His morale was broken. And if you were in a survival situation, that could be a morale breaker. But this fruit, the pawpaw fruit, is available at the end of the summer. That's really unique. Most fruits are ripe earlier than that. But let me tell you what it tastes like. First of all, its shape, you can't describe it. There's all kinds of shapes. It could be a peanut shape, maybe about that long. It could be an oval. It could be a pear shape. Lots of variety. But when you bite into it, you're tasting a mix of pineapple, banana, and mango. I know that's hard to believe, but when you first sink your teeth into that, remember this moment when I told you that. Sure. Yeah. Just below that picture is a fruit that I find most people are not familiar with. It's called serviceberry. Serviceberry gets its name because it's an early spring bloomer. It puts out a white, spindly, kind of spider-looking blossom And up north, when people died in the winter, they were not buried because the ground was too hard. So they were put in cold storage. And it was generally thought that when the service berry bloomed, it was time for the funeral service. That's when they could dig into the earth. But that berry is quite tasty. It turns to it starts off red and it turns darker and can turn quite a dark red. But here's the most interesting thing that I've found about it, and I haven't been able to find any scientific information about this. The only time I ever find serviceberry trees that make fruit are those that stand right next to waterfalls. So tuck that away in the back of your mind so you'll know where to look for that. The serviceberry tree has an extremely uniform serration around the edge. I mean, it's one of the most perfect serrations that we have. And if you look really closely where the leaf meets the leaf stalk, you can see it on this one perhaps. There's a slight little heart shape to it. Okay, then let's see. Just to the right of that, we have a plant that you all know. You've all eaten from, blackberry. Let me tell you something interesting about blackberry. This is a little sneak preview of my class tomorrow, which is all about medicines and plants. Blackberry leaves are known to be astringent. Astringent means chemical that causes your tissue to tighten up, to draw up. Men use astringents when they cut themselves shaving. You know, there's a little styptic pencil that we put on that. And what it does is it causes the capillaries to squeeze shut. So you can use astringents externally to stop bleeding. But in this case, this is one of the few astringents that the human can tolerate taking internally. So you could make a tea with blackberry leaves, and that tea will stop diarrhea. Because, let's talk about what diarrhea is a moment. It is the body's reaction to you putting something in your body that does not belong there. And so your body takes in as much fluid from everywhere that it can to flush out your digestive tract. All of those little, let's think of them as faucets coming into the main line. All of those tighten up with blackberry tea to stop all that fluid from going through. Perhaps the worst thing about diarrhea in terms of survival is that it's very dehydrating. And if you got the diarrhea originally from drinking some bad water, you're going to be tempted to drink more of that bad water. Which simply boils down to this. There's the perfect verb for this one. Boils down to this. You need to know how to purify water. Okay, just to the right of that, we have both kinds of mulberry trees. Red mulberry and white mulberry. Red is native, the white was brought here from Europe. That's perhaps our sweetest fruit. And those become ripe in most parts of Southern Appalachia in May. The last picture on the right, bottom right, shows you the leaves and the trunk of a persimmon tree. You notice that I don't show the fruits here in most cases. I'm showing you something else so that you'll look harder at the plant. The persimmon tree makes some of the most nondescript leaves you'll see. It's very hard to say one thing about a persimmon leaf to help another person know how to recognize it. But the bark has a very definite look. Once the tree matures, there's a very chunky look to the bark, as if it's made up of lots of little cubical pieces of bark all glued together like a puzzle. Persimmons ripen in the fall. There's an adage that says they won't ripen until the first frost, but That's just an old husband's tale. Persimmons are ready when they're soft and mushy. That's all you have to know. And a good way to get them down is to lay some materials down on the ground, climb up in the tree, and just act like Tarzan. You shake the tree violently. They rain down on the materials, tarp, or sheets, or whatever. I will warn you this. If you ever bite into an unripe persimmon, a lot of you have done that, you will never do it again. Because that is the ultimate astringency. What it does to your mouth is hard to put into words. But it feels something like the entire lining of your mouth has suddenly turned into cotton. It's a strange feeling. Now I want to tell you about a part of a tree that I find that most people are not familiar with. And it's called the inner bark. To explain this to you, let me just go over quickly the anatomy of a tree. And I think you may find something in here that might be new to you. Okay, imagine that my legs and my torso are the trunk of a tree, right? We all know that trees suck up water and nutrients and minerals. But where does that go up the tree? What part of the tree is that? Even if you happen to know names like xylem and phloem, that still doesn't help us know where that is, does it? Well, I'm going to tell you about where that place is. But before I do, let me tell you this, that all that material goes up into the leaves. And it's the leaves that are the most profound miracle of the tree. Because there, every leaf makes a very definite list of chemicals. If it's a sweet gum tree, it makes one list of chemicals only. If it's a dogwood tree, it makes another list of chemicals only, and so on. Once those chemicals are made, the tree, and I think we can use this word, is smart enough to keep certain chemicals in the leaves to protect them. And these are usually toxins. And that's to prevent the trees from being defoliated by insect swarms and by other animals. The rest of the chemicals go down the tree. Where does that happen? The answer to that is in the inner bark. That's the layer just underneath the outer bark. The outer bark you all know. Take a look at that picture on the right. You're looking at a strip of inner bark that has been partially peeled up off of the wood. So let me take you through the layers quickly, okay? So let's start on the very inside of the tree. At the very center is the pith, P-I-T-H. This is a water storage area, and it's a weaker area of the tree, and that makes the tree stronger. Because now the tree can bend without breaking. The ultimate tree like that would be the palm tree. You've seen pictures of them in a hurricane. And then after the hurricane's over, there they are. Because they were able to bend with the storm. So that's the pith. The next layer is all dead wood. This is the backbone of the tree. This is what holds the tree upright. And this is called the heartwood. The next layer is a living part of the tree called the sapwood. It's a lighter color usually than the heartwood. And that's where water goes up the tree with minerals and nutrients in it. There are tubes in that wood that carry those fluids up. And then once the leaves do their thing and send certain chemicals down the tree, because the roots have got to have food. And you know those leaves are making food. That's called the inner bark. And that's the layer just underneath the outer bark. And then you know the outer bark is the covering. It's the protective covering of the tree. So this may be your first look at inner bark. There it is. So with that knife, I gently removed the outer bark. And now you're looking down on a strip of inner bark, and you see where it came from? That's the sapwood. That's that light colored wood. Can you make out the green color on the inner bark? Okay, listen to this. That is a 1 cell thick layer called a cambium. I bet you've heard that word before, but you might have been misinformed about it. Many books tell you that the cambium layer is the same thing as the inner bark. The cambium layer is 1 cell thick. You're seeing the rest of the inner bark, which is close to 3/16 of an inch. So the cambium layer is one part of the inner bark, but it's an important part. The cambium is where every cell that the tree makes is produced. Everything comes from that layer. So as a tree grows, every new cell that becomes part of a branch or a leaf originated in the cambium layer. Now remember what I said was left in the leaves oftentimes? A toxin. So sometimes we cannot eat a leaf from a tree, but we can make use of its inner bark as a food, because the toxins are filtered out. And you know what? You can 100% depend on a tree to filter it out effectively. There's never been a case of a tree making a mistake that way. Does this mean you can eat the inner bark of all trees? No. In our area, we have about 7 trees whose inner bark can be eaten. I'm going to tell you the name of one of those. Poplar. But here's what I'm not talking about. There is no such thing as a tulip poplar. There's no such thing as a yellow poplar, even though you may see that in a book. That tree is called a tulip magnolia. The one you're thinking about, that you've heard all your life called a tulip poplar, is a magnolia. It is not edible. But a true poplar, you may know cottonwood, you may know aspen, those are poplars. They have edible inner bark. And that's how you extract it, just like that. You carefully remove outer bark, and on a branch that thin, outer bark is very thin. So let me tell you the best way to get that bark off of there. You don't just take a knife and start cutting forward with a straight stroke. You slice across as you move the knife down this way. That's the best way to remove a very thin layer. Now the pine is the only one of the 7 trees that has a problem with it. If you eat the inner bark of a pine tree raw, you can eat a little bit of it. It's going to taste very turpentine, but after you eat enough of it, you're going to get a stomachache that you'll never forget, because of the chemical that pine trees make called terpenes. And terpenes are really rough on the lining of the stomach, and you'll get nausea. So how do you get rid of it? Terpenes are very volatile, and they will be easily removed from the inner bark by heating. The easiest way to do it: heat up a stone on your hot coals. Get a stick and flip it over. Heat it up another 10 or 15 minutes. And then flip it back one more time and heat it up again. And then next time, flip it over closer to the edge of the fire. Place your pine inner bark right on top of the rock, and the heat drives out the terpenes. And then you can eat it raw. Even better, how about this? You can make pasta with pine inner bark. Get lots of strips of it, real thin. Dry it in the sun. It gets real hard and crusty. And then with mortar and pestle or metate, stone, crush into a powder. You can make flour. If you put those noodles, those strips into salt water and soak them for a while, 3 hours, remove them, put them in fresh water, boil them, you have pasta. And you could add to that anything you normally put on pasta, and you would enjoy that meal. Anybody have questions about inner bark? A couple more berries to talk about. Elderberry has two varieties. One of them goes to fruit, and at maturity is all reddish. The other one goes through a red phase, but eventually ends up being blue-black, very much like a blueberry. It is that latter one that you want to eat, not the red one. The red one is known to cause stomach upset. But elderberry is so high in vitamin C that many people and scientists have done this as an experiment as well. Freeze elderberries and save them for winter, for the flu season. And there are certain flu viruses that have been killed simply using elderberries. To the right of that, we have a vine that trails along the ground called partridge berry. It's a very unique fruit in that it takes 2 flowers to make one berry. If you look closely at one of the berries, you can see the 2 dimples where the flowers once articulated with the berry itself. When you pluck the berry off of its stalk, that leaves a 3rd little scar there. That's how you recognize that you have the correct berry for sure. This is an evergreen vine, by the way. You could go out into the woods right now and find this. You might even find some red berries that might be left if they haven't been all eaten by the birds. Two of my favorite underground tubers are these 2. The first one we'll talk about is groundnut. You are looking right here at one leaf of groundnut, and these are leaflets. That makes this a compound leaf. The way you tell whether or not you have a compound leaf is that you look at a plant all over and just see, is it repeating a certain number of blades? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Think of the hickory tree, for example. When you see that repetition of the number, then you know you're looking at a compound leaf. And here's how you can know for certain. There's no such thing as a leaflet bud. This whole leaf falls off in the autumn. It would do no good to have a bud. Buds are at the base of leaves, not leaflets. So you can see, with a close look, the bud from next spring already there. That bud is established the spring before it's going to open up. Buds are there for a long time. Underground, you have tubers. Here you can see some that I've split open so you can see their interior. This is called groundnut, and they were once commonly called by another name, hopniss, Hopniss. The same plant. This is one that does need to be cooked. So think of it as a potato that you're going to boil. It has some white latex inside of it that you'll see kind of ooze out of it when you slice it. That's one of the reasons we have to cook it before we can eat it. You will find this on the banks of creeks and on the edges of meadows, on the low ground where you have more water in the ground. Needs a lot of sun. The other plant is Solomon's seal. This is the real beauty of a plant. It has grass-like leaves that alternate. And look at the berries hanging down below. what's unique about it is that the flowers, which of course preceded the fruit, the flowers only emerge from the place where the leaf attaches to the stem. There's a name for that little place. It's called the axil, A-X-I-L. So the flowers emerge from there, and they usually emerge in 2s or 3s, sometimes 4, a little cluster of flowers. And then if they are pollinated and go to fruit, then you've got these little clusters of fruit there. The fruit is edible. It's got a rather large seed inside, so you don't get a lot of pulp out of it. But try it. You'll like it. It's got a nutty taste to it. The real treat is underground. And you can see that tuber being held right in front of the plant right there. Can you see in the picture where those 2 raised sections are that look a little bit like craters? This is where, in years before, stems came off of that tuber. So that's the scar left behind by the stem itself. And they create these little crater-like structures, and it made a botanist think about a royal seal that was stamped into wax. And so they called it Solomon's seal. That's how it gets its name. This one you can eat raw, but it's even better when you cook it because it brings out more flavor when you cook it. Something that's good to know about this plant is that it can be helpful to people who suffer from problems, actually 2 opposing problems that are kind of related to one another, diabetes and hypoglycemia. When you're hypoglycemic, you eat something that has a lot of sugar, food, or energy in it, and you get this rush, or you've got a lot of energy, and then you feel depressed because it's all burned up so fast. But Solomon's seal root contains a chemical called inulin, I-N-U-L-I-N. And it is a slow metabolizing carbohydrate. It's better for your body to work sort of like a time release rather than a purge all at once. It's a delicious root. When I hold my survival classes and we prepare these foods, Solomon's seal is always a big hit. The lowly dandelion. Now, this is not a native plant, but it's naturalized here, of course, all over the country. It may surprise you to learn that the most nutritious wild food in the world is dandelion. There are more nutrients packed in it than any other. Young leaves are edible. The older leaves get quite bitter. The root is edible. The flower is edible. Do not attempt to eat the flower after it goes to seed. That would not be a great experience. A lot of high-end restaurants like to serve dandelion because, I guess it's sort of a trendy thing to do. But what they'll usually do is, there are farms that just grow dandelions. Did you know that? A weed farm. Who would ever believe it? I know a fellow up in New England. That's all he grows. It's a big farm full of dandelions, and he sells them to restaurants. The best leaves to eat are those that are underneath other leaves, so that they haven't gotten a lot of sunlight, they haven't had a chance to develop a lot of chlorophyll. They're just a little tastier that way. But used sparingly in a salad, even if they were bitter, you're still a wonderful source of nutrition. There are a lot of dandelion lookalikes. So let me point out one thing you want to look for. This is not the only thing, but if you look carefully at this, you might be able to see how the teeth, here you can see it really well, the teeth on the edge of the leaflet tend to point backward a little bit toward the base of the leaf. It's called a recurved tooth. So if the leaf was going this way, here's the base of it, you've got teeth that kind of pointed down like spurs. Greenbrier is one of the tastiest foods you will ever snack on in the forest. Everybody knows greenbrier. You've been snagged on it enough times walking through the woods. You probably are most familiar with it when it's very mature and very stiff and woody. But when it puts out new growth in the springtime, in May, you have a real opportunity for something very, very tasty. And that is all of the brand new growth. On this particular specimen here, it looks like everything from here up. You'll know just by feeling it with your teeth as you chew. Every part is edible. The tendrils, these are the appendages that help the vine to stand up by holding on to other trees and shrubs and whatever. The leaves, and even the thorns are edible when they're this young. They're very rubbery. The taste is terrific. Here are the 2 times that you don't want to eat greenbrier. So be on the lookout for this. If you find a specimen of new growth in the month of May, if you see a pinkish color in the new growth, it's going to be too bitter to enjoy. If it's very thin and spindly, it's going to be bitter. So we need a plump, all green, new shoot of growth. Greenbrier is also called smilax. We've got lots of different kinds of smilax. All of them share this edibility. It needs to be soft. Now let me tell you where the real treasure is. Picture a large oak tree, and there's greenbrier that's growing up, and it's tangled all up in there. It goes very high, and the greenbrier is very sharp and very woody. You would think, well, nothing there, but here's what you should do. There's a way to pull that down without getting hurt. If you gently squeeze as you're sliding down on the vine, you'll blunt those briars until you can get a firm grip, and then do the same with the other, and then pull the vine. And that vine subdivides maybe 20 times up there. And at the end of every one of those 20 branches, you've got a snack. Try that.
Is that the same as sawbriar?
Sawbriar is a type of greenbrier. Yeah.
Catbrier.
Catbrier is another name. Okay, on the right we have a non-native plant, but it's naturalized everywhere. It's not an aggressive plant like kudzu. So it's not of concern to us like kudzu, honeysuckle, autumn olive, privet, things like that. Broadleaf plantain just doesn't take over an area. It prefers hard-packed soil. So it's selective about where it grows. This plant has some wonderful things for us as gifts, and one of them is food. The leaves are edible. Notice the veins in these leaves. Look familiar? Remember the wapato? Those are parallel veins again. Plantain does not have a stem. Plantain grows all of its leaves from the top of the root. And this is what's called a basal rosette of leaves. So never expect to see a structure come out with more leaves on it. The only thing that comes up is the flower stalk. And you can see it in this picture. This particular flower stalk has already, well, there's a few flowers left on it. They're very inconspicuous. But mostly it's gone to seed now. And the seeds themselves can be used internally in a great way because they contain psyllium. That's the substance that you buy when you get Metamucil or some other product like that to help you be more regular with your digestive tract. It's in those seeds. So you can use that as a substitute for the can of fiber of psyllium that you can buy these days for about $25. Instead, go out and use the weeds in your yard. Since I said the word yard, I need to bring this up. Always be sure of the area you're collecting from. You know what goes into your yard and what does not, but you can't know that about other people's yards. So be thoughtful about where you gather from so that you're not inadvertently getting chemicals that are sprayed with it. The side of the road is a bad idea because of all the exhausts that come out and spray out there.
How close do we have to worry about our neighbors? Like if my neighbor does his weed and feed and I have daily life.
You need to worry about that. Maybe your entire yard needs to worry about that. Sad to say. Because that stuff travels in ways that we can't see. By the way, those same seeds contain the B vitamins that work as insect repellents. So you can eat the top inch of the seeds of plantain once a day. Eat the top inch once a day through the summer. And you're creating your own insect repellency from the inside. You can do the same thing by eating a clove of garlic every day. This is easier. The trout lily, which comes up in early spring, when the leaves first come out, the leaves are edible. They have a real nice peppery taste to them and a sweetness also. This plant is called dentaria, or toothwort. It got its name because if you were to dig up the roots of this, you'd see these white knobby row that reminds you of teeth. And it turns out that the leaves and the root of this are edible with a very distinct taste of horseradish. So this is a really good addition to a sandwich or a salad. Another one of those compound leaves that has 3 leaflets like poison ivy does. Which means the meadow rule leaves of 3, You're going to miss out on toothwort if you follow that rule. All of the mints are extremely good for us for our digestion. All I got to do is tell you this one story that happened to me. I ran summer camps for about 40-something years. And on one of those, we were out in a very remote area, and it's a week at a time. These kids never have anything to drink but water. There are no frills about it. And one day I caught a garter snake, and we had a snake lesson. And I said, now watch what happens, everybody, as I relaxed my grip on the snake, and the snake wrapped its tail around me and smeared its musk on me. It's an incredibly bad smell. Why I did that, I don't know. I guess that's called experiential teaching. But then when I let the snake go, everybody was kind of looking at me like, well, what are you going to do about that? Because it smells horrible. So I said, well, let me go find some plants to help me out with this. So one of those plants was sweet pepper bush, which makes soap. So I got some leaves and water and washed my hands with it. And then I took some of this white horse mint, you see, and just scrubbed with that. And very good. And as I was mixing the horse mint on my hands, my camper said, wow, that smells great. They hadn't had anything in a week that was of a strong flavor like that. They said, I told them, you can make a tea with mints. And they said, really? Can we make some tonight? So we made a bunch that night, and I said, okay, everybody, one rule, just 1 cup for each person. So I told a story that night, and while I'm telling it, little do I know that they're having 2, 3, 4 cups. The next day, we planned to hike to the highest mountain within hiking distance from us. And every time we got everybody together to get going on our hike, all of us with our backpacks on, somebody would say, wait a minute, I got to go to the latrine. And that went on for an hour. Finally, we gave up our quest to go to the mountain, and we spent our day around camp, and everybody learned about the medicines that can relieve constipation. A few cooked greens that are mighty nice. One is called pokeweed. Unfortunately, it got the name of poke salad. And here's why. In old England, in medieval times, it was called a sallet. S-A-L-L-E-T, which means a cooked green. The opposite of a salad, which you can eat raw. This you should not eat raw. You boil it in one bit of water for just a few minutes, and then you pour that water off, and then you boil it again to cook it, and then it's ready. And it is delicious greens. One of the most nutritious foods in the world is stinging nettle. We have two kinds of nettle that sting. Wood nettle and stinging nettle. There are only differences that one of them has opposite leaves and one has alternate leaves. They both are excellent when cooked. You have to cook them because it converts the formic acid, which is the part that stings. It's a really fascinating plant. Every little bristle that comes off of the stems and stalks and the leaves is like a hypodermic. And when you touch it, there's a sac that squeezes, that pushes the needle out and deflates the formic acid and sends it into the person. It's really a unique little operation. And it stings. It's exactly like being stung by fire ants. So you cook it, and that converts the formic acid to protein. Milkweed has got lots of natural latex in it. We eat only the brand new growth on it. And there are different schools of thought about it. Yule Gibbons and others always advise that you drop it into boiling water. So if I found a plant growing this tall and right at the top is brand new growth, it's real obvious. It's so bendable. It's not like the rest of the plant. It's soft. It's a lighter green. It breaks off easily. Drop that into boiling water. Cook it. And I guarantee you, if you give it to somebody and say, guess what that is, they will say, fresh asparagus. Cooked asparagus. It's a delicious food. One of the great cooked leaves for the Cherokee is a plant they call Sochani. I'm going to spell that for you. S-O-C-H-A-N-I. That word got distorted by white people. We distorted almost all the Indian words we ever came our way. And so you'll hear it referred to as Sochani. In the books, you'll find it as green-headed coneflower. In the spring, the brand new leaves of this can be plucked off and cooked twice, just like the pokeweed. This time it's not for a poison to get rid of it, but this time it's for making the taste a little bit milder, because it has a real gamey taste to it. Today, the Cherokee women of Oconaluftee at the Cherokee boundary in North Carolina, every spring they walk the rivers Oconaluftee and the Raven Fork, and they collect bags of Sochani leaves and now freeze them. So the old tradition has been expanded to year-round now because of technology. That boundary, does anybody happen to know the name of that Cherokee boundary? It's not a reservation. Qualla. You know what qualla is? It is the drink that's made from these berries, sumac. We have several different kinds of sumac. People are always worried about poison sumac and mistaking it. Well, this is pretty easy. Poison sumac's berries mature to be grayish white, and all the other sumacs mature to be dark red berries. So any of the dark red berries can be used. You break off the entire head, kind of teardrop shape of berries, and go through them and rescue all the insects that are in there first. And then put it in a container with water and just let it sit. Before you can drink it, you've got to filter it, because every berry is covered with tiny hairs that come loose in the liquid. And those little hairs won't harm you, but they will get stuck in your throat and cause you to cough a long time. So you just pour it off through a towel.
Tastes like lemonade.
A lot of people say it tastes like lemonade, but to me it's got its own taste. It's a very different taste. I might even say it's got a tinge of raspberry to it. Very unique. Anybody have any questions they'd like to ask about any things we've talked about? All right, well, let me mention this.
Most people are contagious as far as your skin. That's something.
I've never heard of old people being contagious to this, or it being contagious to them. When you're talking about what some people can tolerate and what some can't, you just cannot predict that. All of us have body chemistries, and they're dictated by our genetics, our lifestyles, and our diet. Everyone's different. So you always need to test yourself whenever you're trying something new. Remember I mentioned about the insect repellent. Well, the same thing applies to the food. Just nibble a little bit. Make sure you're going to be okay with it. You know how some people can swell up and choke to death by eating a couple of strawberries, right? If you just jump right into something, you might make a discovery like that about yourself. So you want to be smart about working your way into things. I've got a series of books that I wrote that are part of my mission. I found that many parents that I've talked to who say, I want to teach my child about nature, but I just don't know really how to go about it. And they keep asking me questions, and I don't know the answers to them. And you know, parents can only say, I don't know, so many times before they start losing their self-esteem as a parent. They just don't want to go there. So I've written a series of books for those people, as well as the same books for people who simply want to learn the skills of the Cherokees, how to do all these things that I teach. And the series is called Secrets of the Forest. There are 4 volumes, and each volume is specific to about certain subjects. Volume 1 is all about plants. So every word that I've spoken today is in Volume 1, plus a whole lot more. Volume 2 is all about fire. And it's also about ceremony and storytelling, something greatly lacking in our culture now. It's a great teaching tool. Volume 3 is all about animals, how to stalk them, how to read their tracks, how to learn about their habitat and their habits. And the other item in that book is games in nature. If you take a grandchild or a nephew, niece out into the forest, and you really want them to have that good experience that makes them want to come back, then have a game in your back pocket. Do something there that's just done for fun. It could be something so simple, like using a log as a balance beam. Who can make it all the way? If you can make nature the playground of the child, you've done something positive for the child. The 4th book is all about projectiles. This may be a guy thing, I'm not sure. Bows and arrows, spears, blowguns and darts, that kind of thing. How to make them, how to use them. And it's also about learning how to whitewater canoe. The first book I published was a memoir called 2 Winters in a Teepee. It's the story of a naturalist still working, holding classes, but he's living in the forest in a teepee. That's my true story for 2 years. That was the 2 years after I lost everything I owned in the house fire. I was always headed for a teepee. That made me jump to. I also write novels, and my novels are based upon things that I know, of course. So a lot of my novels include the information that you're running across here about Cherokees, about the usage of plants. I have a strong interest in the American West. So I've been a Western historian for quite a number of years too, and I lecture out west on certain subjects. I've got a trilogy on Wyatt Earp based on the absolute best research in the country. Not my research, but the 4 best researchers in the world who are now good friends of mine. I use their research to make a good, readable story. Another person I was greatly interested in, you ever heard of Henry McCarty? Well, he changed his name into Henry Antrim. Then he changed his name to Billy Bonney. And then we call him today Billy the Kid. Fascinating young man. His history has been misrepresented in a lot of stories. So I have a book about him. And my latest one is about a person I wish America would learn about. One of the reasons I wrote this book is to get him known to people. His is one of the greatest stories of the American West I've ever come across. His name is Nate Champion. He was an unwilling part of the Johnson County Wars of Wyoming in 1892. If you ever want a hero whom no historian will ever debunk or show you the bad side of and ruin your whole image, read about Nate Champion. What a guy he must have been. How I would love to meet him. I've also got some books that demonstrate my very sick humor. I don't know what happens to me sometimes, but I get off on this tangent and I write parodies of the Old West. And those are out there too. They have a guarantee. And one of them's about the Trail of Tears, believe it or not. Can you imagine writing a humorous book about the Trail of Tears? Doesn't seem possible, does it? It's actually a reversal of the Trail of Tears. Anyway, if you don't laugh out loud while you're reading these books, you can get your money back. That's my guarantee. Thank you for being with me today. I hope this is of some help to you. Wow, listen to this, everybody.